Hey Rip City, this is DeAndre Ayton, and it's time to open the briefcase with Casey Holdahl.
Greetings, Blazer fans, and welcome to The Briefcase, presented by Spirit Mountain Casino, episode 121 of The Briefcase. I'm your host, Casey Holdahl, and the Trailblazers have 4 games down, 1 game remaining on a 5-game road trip, finishing up Wednesday night in Indianapolis before heading back home to Portland. Played 2 games in Houston versus the Rockets, split those 2 games, then headed to Memphis, losing a game to the Grizzlies once again, kind of in the same fashion they lost the last one. Not nearly as bad, not nearly as disappointing, but the main reason they lost the last game versus the Grizzlies was the same reason they lost this game versus the Grizzlies. Unfortunately, also injuries are back for the Portland Trailblazers after having a run of good health for a couple weeks there. They are right back into having the majority of their team, at least on the injury report, and a couple of very important key players out for at least a extended period of time. We'll talk about that. We'll hear from Deni Avdija after practice in Indianapolis as the team finishes up this road trip. And we'll discuss real quickly about Donovan Clingan and why he's not in the Rookie of the Year race. He should be in the Rookie of the Year race on this edition of The Briefcase. Trailblazers spent about 4 nights in Houston to play those back-to-back games, ended up losing the first game in the back-to-back series. Unfortunately, that was the NBA Cup game, which, while it didn't completely ruin Portland's chances of advancing in the NBA Cup, very, very unlikely that they're going to advance in the NBA Cup because of that loss to the Rockets. They were able to bounce back the next night and win versus the Rockets thanks to a full-on team effort. Really great grade from Deni Avdija. Anthony Simons having probably his best game of the season, kind of coming out of the funk that it seems like he's been in. So that was great. Team has a day off, heads to Memphis to play the Grizzlies for the second time this season. And while it wasn't as demoralizing as the first game versus the Grizzlies, definitely not a game the Portland Trailblazers would have liked to had. End up losing that game 123-98 Monday night in Memphis. Blazers once again cannot hit the broadside of a barn from 3. They ended up going 8 of 46 from 3 in that game, which is very similar to the problem they had in the last game versus the Grizzlies, in which they shot 4 of 42 from 3 in that loss as well. Again, not as demoralizing because, the Blazers did have a better effort. They did just kind of hang in there. Chauncey Billups talked about how, even though they were undermanned, and they were undermanned in that game, they still continued to fight, something we didn't necessarily see in Portland versus the Grizzlies. Also, the Grizzlies had many more players available this time around they had when they played in Portland. Ja Morant making his return to the lineup Monday night for the Grizzlies in Memphis. 22 points, 11 assists in just 23 minutes for Ja Morant in that one. And one of those games where the Blazers ended up, had some injuries going into the game, had some more injuries as the game went on, and basically were down to the two-way guys and the guys towards the end of the bench by the end of the game. Didn't really feel to me like they were probably going to win that game, even if everyone was available, at least the guys who were available at the start of the game. But still a game where, if you hit some 3-pointers, you maybe give yourself a chance to at least keep it close in that game. Blazers, as I mentioned, going 8 of 46 from 3 in that game basically gives you no chance to compete. And a lot of the shots they missed too, I thought they were pretty good shots. They were just off, and not only were they off by a lot. I think I stopped counting. I feel like I at least saw 4 air balls from 3 in that game for the Trailblazers. It was probably actually more than that, and a lot of the shots just didn't look like they really had a chance to connect either way. So that was disappointing. So the Blazers moved to 1-3 on the road in this 5-game trip. Lose to Oklahoma City to start the trip. Lose the first game, I should say, to the Rockets. Win the second game versus the Rockets, and then lose in Memphis on Monday. 1 more game remaining versus the Pacers on Wednesday. 4 o'clock start time, KATU 2.2, and Blazer Vision. One of the things we did see in that Memphis game, though, was a continuation of what we saw in the second game versus the Rockets, which was that Deni Avdija really kind of starting to piece together a couple really nice games coming off the bench and kind of giving the Blazers that everything kind of game that they need right now, which makes a lot of sense, particularly considering how down on players they are. And we're gonna talk here in a minute about the number of players who are injured for the Trailblazers. But Deni Avdija really kind of coming up and having some really nice performances. He had 17 points, 8 rebounds, 6 assists, a block, and a steal in the loss to the Grizzlies on Monday. And prior to that, he had 14 points, 10 rebounds, 4 blocks, 2 assists, and a steal in the win versus the Rockets. Also played some great post defense in that game as well after Donovan Clingan went out due to a knee injury, and Robert Williams was out due to a concussion as well. One of the reasons why they're able to win that game, between Deni Avdija's defense and just kind of his all-around game, and Anthony Simons really coming on in the fourth quarter, scoring 13 points in the fourth quarter in that second game versus the Rockets. The two main reasons Blazers were able to get that game. But just a really nice effort from everyone in that game versus the Rockets. You would hope that would carry over to the game versus the Grizzlies. Was not the case. So the Blazers, once again, with a chance to get one more win on this 5-game road trip after losing to the Grizzlies on Monday in Memphis. Blazers will play that game versus the Pacers on Wednesday in Indianapolis, 4 o'clock start time on KATU 2.2 and Blazer Vision, before heading back to Portland, having Thanksgiving Day off. I don't think any teams in the NBA playing Thanksgiving. That still belongs to the NFL, and I'm fine with that, by the way, too. Let people be with their families for Thanksgiving. But then when they come back, have 2 games at home versus the Kings on Friday in an NBA Cup game. If the Blazers are going to have any chance whatsoever to advance in the NBA Cup, they're going to have to win that game versus the Kings, and probably handily. And they're really going to need some help from the other teams in the group, particularly versus the Rockets. If the Rockets don't take it to at least 2 losses, I don't think the Blazers have a chance. So you would hope that happens in some of these NBA Cup games coming forward. But the first one for the Blazers on Friday, 7 o'clock start time versus the Kings at Moda Center. And then they also host the Mavericks on Sunday, 6 o'clock start time in that game as well, before hitting the road versus the Clippers for another NBA Cup game, their last NBA Cup game of the group play on Tuesday. But before that, we still got another game versus the Pacers Wednesday night, 4 o'clock start time. Well, with the Trailblazers wrapping up a 5-game trip versus the Pacers on Wednesday, let's go ahead and hear from Deni Avdija at practice on Tuesday in Indianapolis. What the team typically has been doing lately, at least in terms of kind of their rhythm, is they'll stay over after games generally. It used to be we would almost always fly out after games. Now it's much more common for teams to stay over, particularly when they're heading east, because you don't want to be traveling and losing time, because they figure that time is better spent for the players to rest. I think that's probably better for everyone else as well. So the team played in Memphis on Monday, stayed the night in Memphis Monday night, heads to Indianapolis on Tuesday, gets to Indianapolis, has a practice once they arrive. I assume that means they probably won't have a shoot-around on Wednesday as well. So they did have a practice on Tuesday in Indianapolis. My partner and co-host of the Blazers Balcony, Brooke Olzendam, spoke to Deni Avdija after practice. Here's what he had to say.
So the nickname Turbo has followed you from Washington to here. I'm curious, when you're heading down the floor, what are you thinking? What are you feeling as you're speeding up?
Wow, it's an interesting question. I don't know. I kind of take a look at the court to see who runs with me, and then, trying to make the right plays. A lot of time I like passing, like just pushing the ball and giving the guys some energy and, run our offense a little more faster. But what I'm thinking, I don't know. I just think I'm fast at the moment.
Coach continues to talk about increasing your pace of play, getting faster. Do you guys think you're getting there?
I think so. I think we have a lot of young guys who are really athletic that can finish at the rim, and I feel like Coach want to take advantage of it, and I kind of understand the point behind it. As I said, I like to push it in transition, so that's good for me. But I think everybody getting used to playing like that, and I think we're going to do a good job in the future for sure.
Coach has said he wants to give you patience as you find your role on this team. 18 games in, what do you think your role is?
I think just playing hard, making the right play, making sure all my teammates on the court are involved, making sure everybody feels good. Pick them up when they're feeling down or whatever, but just like energy. As I said, making the right play good defense, be first of all on the floor, and I feel like kind of be everywhere. So
we talked so much about your defense on Sengun, especially in that second half. How much fun do you have being able to defend 1 through 5?
I mean, I have a lot more matchups to come. So Sengun was a good example of like how versatile I can be on defense, and I feel like it's big. It's big for me, and I really like it that like coaching staff can tell me, oh, you're guarding him today, or you're guarding him today. Like I feel like it's a big plus to have, and I don't take it for granted. So I'll just keep working. As I get stronger, as I get more experience, I'll have easier time just doing it.
Some interesting stuff there from Deni Avdija. As I mentioned, he's having a really good run here on this road trip. I wouldn't at all be surprised if, with some of the injuries they have, if Deni is able to get back into the starting lineup. How long that lasts, who's to say? He has been playing great off the bench. But I would suspect, particularly, with Jeremy Grant being doubtful, which we're going to talk about here in a second, I'm suspecting that Deni Avdija is probably going to start in the game versus the Pacers. And, if this kind of stuff matters, he's absolutely earned it. Like he's played really well the last couple of games, really well since going to the bench. He's taken that and I think done a better job with it than maybe some of the other guys on the team would. So I think you need to reward good play. And two, I think you also reward someone being a bit selfless by going out and maybe giving that guy the start again. So I would not at all be surprised to see Deni Avdija start in that game versus the Pacers. And they're probably going to need to get off to a good start in that game as well, particularly last game of an extended road trip. If you come out a bit soft, a bit tired, the other team kind of jumps on you. And I know there's that mentality too, particularly at the end of a road trip where it's like, hey, either way, we're going home tonight. So would we rather win? Yes. But if we start to lose and we start to lose bad, I think sometimes there's a predilection there to be like, well, end of the trip anyways, so we're heading home. So I'm just satisfied enough with that. So hopefully that will not be the case. Chauncey Billups has these guys ready to play basically every single night. Whether or not they get the victory, that's a different story. But I do feel fairly confident with the way that they're able to prepare and get ready for these games. So hopefully we'll be able to see a better performance Wednesday night versus the Pacer team that has struggled a bit this season. So hopefully Deni Avdija, who's been putting together some really nice games, able to maybe do the same thing versus the Pacers and help the Blazers get a win. Also, having Anthony Simons back, I think, has been really helpful, and it seems like he's getting more and more comfortable as he's been out there. I would also not at all be surprised if DeAndre Ayton doesn't play in that Pacer game. If he doesn't play, then you're down to Duop as the only center on the team. Though Jabari Walker played quite a few minutes at center and power forward center in the game versus the Grizzlies and did an admirable job doing it. So they can definitely go that direction as well. But getting DeAndre back for that game versus the Pacers would definitely go a long way to helping the Blazers get that win. But we'll have to see who's going to be available. We know some of the players who won't be available, but we don't know exactly how many other players will be available. Let's go ahead and talk about that right now with injuries. So as I mentioned, after having a run of good health for a couple weeks, they never got everyone back into the lineup, but I think Matisse was the only player who wasn't available for at least a week or 2 week stretch there. Unfortunately, that streak is gone. Trailblazers dealing with a number of significant injuries and a number of kind of nagging injuries. Basically, 7 players are on the injury report for the Trailblazers, 8 if you count Bryce McGowan's a two-way player, for Wednesday night's game versus the Pacers. That's almost half your team that is on the injury report. Never a great place to be. 3 players with more significant injuries. The team announced on Tuesday afternoon that Trailblazers guard forward Matisse Thybylle suffered a right ankle sprain while ramping up in an effort to return to the court. Matisse has not played yet this season. Thybylle underwent an MRI to confirm a grade 2 sprain of the right ankle. He's expected to miss 3 to 6 weeks. As I mentioned, Matisse hasn't even played yet this season, so putting out his return another 3 to 6 weeks, when my understanding was he was pretty close, is a significant bummer. I don't know exactly what happened, but I have heard that Matisse has been on crutches. I've heard that he was maybe in a boot as well while the team has been on the road. So not great news there. Again, Matisse my understanding was within a week or two of returning in that ramp up. As mentioned, he suffered an injury. And from what I hear, the fact that it's just a grade 2 sprain of his right ankle is probably a good thing. I think there was maybe even some concern that maybe it was even more serious than that. Now, granted, missing another 3 to 6 weeks is not good. And when you've already missed training camp and the start of the season, tacking on probably at least another month, if not longer, onto that is definitely not a good thing. But at this case, probably not as bad as it could have been. Anytime you see a guy on crutches with his ankle wrapped up, you start to wonder if maybe there's a break in there somewhere. So the fact that it is just a ligament issue, not great, but not as bad as it could have been. Speaking of ligaments as well, unfortunately, Donovan Clingan had additional imaging. The imaging isn't the unfortunate part, but the revealed is the unfortunate part. Grade 2 MCL sprain for Donovan Clingan in his left knee. He will be reevaluated in 2 weeks. That happened in the game versus the Rockets, the second game versus the Rockets, sometime in the second half. I thought that he just banked knees. He ended up leaving the game, went to the locker room, came back. They said he was available. He came out, I think, played for maybe another minute. I think they probably recognized pretty quickly that it probably he didn't have it, or was having more issues than I think maybe they previously thought, or at least maybe hoped. So he ended up sitting down. As I mentioned, Deni Avdija came in, did a really good job in his stead. But now he's going to be out for at least 2 weeks with an left MCL sprain, grade 2 sprain. Again, not great. Donovan really starting to put together some really nice games. Doing it consistently in the starting lineup with DeAndre Ayton out, to where you're really kind of starting to see what he brings to that starting lineup, particularly from a defensive perspective. That some of their defensive rating numbers with Donovan out there have been really good, and it's the kind of stuff you're hoping to see from the rookie center. You don't expect that he's going to come in right away and be a dominant defensive force. He has come in away and been a very good defensive force, and it makes you feel really good about where Donovan's at this point in time as just a 20-year-old rookie. But now he's going to be on the shelf for at least the next 2 weeks, and particularly a young player, knee injury, center. I would imagine that they're going to be very careful with that injury. So 2 weeks at a bare minimum. And I would not at all be surprised to see that expand out, because, again, they're just not going to want to take any chance whatsoever with Donovan Clingan and that injury. And then, unfortunately, you have Robert Williams, who was placed in the NBA concussion protocol. He left the game at Memphis. I think I actually misspoke. I said that happened versus the the Rockets. That is not the case. He started versus the Grizzlies and then suffered that concussion in the first half, did not return in the second half. He is in the concussion protocol. No telling how long that takes. I mean, for every single player, that's different. It's really more about what your symptoms are and how quickly you're able to get over those symptoms. So, to even say like you're going to be out X amount of time due to concussion, you can't really do it, because that's not really the nature of the NBA's concussion protocol. At this point, I would say obviously he's at least going to be out for the game versus the Pacers. I would imagine that he's probably going to be out at least for the game versus the Clippers and the Mavericks as well. The Kings and the Mavericks, maybe by the time we get to the Clipper game. But again, that really is dependent on how he is able to progress through that protocol. And the way it works too is you have to kind of hit certain benchmarks in certain times. Also, with it being a holiday, that probably kind of throws some of that into a loop as well. So either way, Blazers going to be without Matisse Thybylle, Donovan Clingan, and Robert Williams III for at least an extended period of time. Matisse 3 to 6 weeks additional. Donovan Clingan at least 2 weeks until he's reevaluated, and then Robert Williams, concussion protocol, not sure exactly when that'll be, but I would guess, bare minimum a week, and probably maybe a little bit longer than that. Never know how each individual is going to respond to the concussion that they received. And then you have the other guys who are trying to get back onto the floor or have sustained injuries during this road trip, who aren't out, but who are at least on the injury report and have not played in a while. So DeAndre Ayton is still listed as questionable with a right index finger contusion for Wednesday's game versus the Pacers. It looks like he did go through practice on Tuesday in Indianapolis. If he's able to go, particularly with the injuries the Blazers have at this point, I imagine he will. We'll have to wait and see on that one. But I've heard he's been getting closer and closer as they've been on this trip, so it wouldn't at all surprise me to see him play in that game versus the Pacers. TBD on that one as well. Scoot Henderson, same thing, back strain. Scoot getting into an accident in an Uber or some kind of rideshare. I actually don't know which company it was. Suffered a back strain. So Scoot is listed as questionable as well, and at this point you probably recognize that obviously I have changed clothes. I had an issue with the exporting process for YouTube, so it's actually a day later. I'm having to re-record this part. I'm going to cut this out of the audio podcast, but those of you who watch on YouTube get to see me look like an idiot here while I put together the rest of the show that unfortunately got cut off for some reason, in which we talked about the rest of the injuries. So obviously Scoot Henderson with that back issue is questionable. Chris Murray also questionable with a sternum bruise that I believe he suffered in the game versus I think maybe the Rockets, and he played versus the Grizzlies and is still dealing with it, but is listed as questionable. And Brass McGowan's on a two-way contract, also listed as questionable as well. So the Blazers, if some of those guys are able to come back, that'd be great. If not, seems like they'll be, as of right now, at least 7 players on their 50-man roster are on the injury report, which is not great, particularly after having a really good run of health for the Trailblazers, to now be in a situation where they're really up against it in terms of the amount of players they have available is not great. But also, We're the Portland Trailblazers. We're used to it. So what are you going to do? So after a run of good health, the Trailblazers now getting a bit unlucky in terms of their injuries. One place you're not going to get unlucky is at Spirit Mountain Casino, where they have 2,000s of the latest slots, including the fan favorites like Buffalo, Cleopatra, and Zeus. Whether you're into traditional slots or progressive jackpots, Spirit Mountain Casino is here to elevate your game. Check out Spirit Mountain Casino on Highway 18 in Grand Ronde. I just passed it the other day on my way back home from the coast. Fantastic, nice misty mountain morning at Spirit Mountain Casino. Hopefully a lot of winners out there as well. They got the Top Golf Suite. They got a great venue with some great acts coming through. They got the hotel as well. And if you don't want to cook for the Thanksgiving holiday, Spirit Mountain Casino has you covered there as well. Spirit Mountain Casino, elevate your game. The last thing I want to talk about in this edition of the Briefcase presented by Spirit Mountain Casino is Donovan Clingan. As we mentioned, he's going to be out for a couple weeks with that MCL strain, so that is a bummer. But one of the things I'd noticed prior to that was, ESPN did an update about kind of some of the year-end awards, and, we're only a month into the season, so even asking about year-end awards probably doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but, it's something to do. And when they asked about Rookie of the Year, they listed kind of all the players who were getting votes from their quote-unquote NBA insiders about Rookie of the Year, and Donovan Clingan did not get mentioned. I believe there were 8 players that were mentioned that at least got some votes. Donovan Clingan got none, which is insane to me. The fact that he is leading rookies in blocks at 2.2 per game and is third in the league in blocks at 2.2 a game, despite only playing like 60 minutes a game. He's also first in offensive rebounding among rookies at 3.2 per game, and he's third among rookies in total rebounding at 6.7 per game, and he's fifth in shooting percentage, at least among rookies who are playing at least 10 minutes a game, at 52.6%. They don't do the thing anymore too where they say qualified. Like you used to have to be qualified in stats, and that would be a certain benchmark of stats in order to kind of show up on those leaderboards. Now they don't do that anymore. So you really got to weed through some of the guys who are on 10-day contracts or have played 1 or 2 games or have only played 5 minutes a game. But once you get rid of those guys, Donovan Clingan looks even better. I'm not saying Donovan Clingan has been the best rookie this year. I would say that's been Jared McCain, the guard out of Philadelphia. He's been great this year too, and he is the player that had the most votes, and by a lot, and rightfully so. He's playing an important role on that team right now. We know they're not winning very many games right now, but he has looked like the best rookie out of this class so far this season. But on the defensive end, Donovan Clingan has looked phenomenal. I think he's looked as good as any other rookie on the defensive end this season. And that is half of the game is defense. So it'd be nice if a guy like Donovan Clingan, who not only is he putting up great defensive stats, but he's also putting up some stats that only a few players have ever put up before, and all those guys are Hall of Famers. I'm talking about had whatever his 18 points, 8 blocks that night he had a few games ago back in Portland. When you put up those kind of numbers as a 20-year-old rookie, you got to get some credit for that. And so to not see him mentioned at all in terms of the Rookie of the Year race, again, I'm not saying that he should win it. I'm not saying he should be the front runner, but for him to not get mentioned at all doesn't make any sense to me whatsoever. Because again, I think particularly as he's seen his role increase, I think we've really seen that Donovan, in terms of defense, particularly paint defense, which is incredibly important in the NBA, is already very good as a 20-year-old. And he's only going to get better. And so I would hope that he's able to get a little bit of credit for what he's been doing his rookie season. And again, people don't need to be fawning over him. They don't need to say he should be winning Rookie of the Year. They don't need to say he's the front runner, but he's got to be top 5 in Rookie of the Year. And I realize that's even a low bar in my personal opinion. But the fact is, he has been very good in a class that, really hasn't had a whole lot of players distinguish themselves yet. So, I think that he's been as good defensively, again, as any other rookie in the NBA this season. He should get some credit for that. Are the kind of stats that usually win you Rookie of the Year? No, usually the guy who wins Rookie of the Year is just the rookie who plays a lot of minutes and probably scores the most points. And a lot of times that makes sense, but sometimes it doesn't. I think particularly with this class, I don't think that makes a whole lot of sense. I think you probably need to look other places for value. And I think Donovan Clingan, considering what he brings on the defensive end, again, as a 20-year-old who is 18 games into his professional career, I think he needs to get a little more credit for what he's been doing because he's been pretty great, particularly on the defensive end of the ball. And he's getting better offensively as well as he becomes more accustomed to getting up to speed in the NBA game. And as his teammates start to look for him a bit more, I think you're probably going to see a little bit more of Donovan's game unlocked as the season goes on. And maybe at that point, he can get some credit. He should be getting credit for what he's doing defensively anyways, but maybe if he has a little bit of offensive game or a little additional offensive game to add to what is already a very good defensive game, he will get a little bit of that attention. And that's going to do it for this edition of The Briefcase. Thank you so much for joining me. As always, The Briefcase presented by Spirit Mount Casino. We'll be back next week. Get this holiday squared away. I hope you all have a great Thanksgiving. Come back, have some more NBA Cup games on Friday versus the Kings. Unfortunately, though, with the Rockets winning their third NBA Cup game, basically they have clinched the group. The Blazers' best case scenario at this point would be to get one of those wild card spots, which still is going to be pretty difficult. Though if they're able to win their games versus the Kings and the Clippers by a lot of points with just one loss, they will put themselves in a position where they could get to that wild card spot. But they got to win both those games, and they have to win both those games by a lot of points. Hopefully they'll be able to do that. Friday versus the Kings. Day after Thanksgiving, you got the day off anyways. Come out to Moda Center, should be a good one. And then Sunday versus the Mavs, 6 o'clock start time for that one. We're heading back out for their last tournament game, at least of group stage play, versus the Clippers on Tuesday. And we'll talk about that when we see you next time on The Briefcase, presented by Spirit Mountain Casino. I am Casey Holdahl. We'll talk to you soon. Go Blazers.
Thanks for listening to The Briefcase. Catch you next time.